Te damos la bienvenida a ApplePodcast. La plataforma de divulgación en fisioterapia donde tenemos la oportunidad de sentarnos a charlar con grandes profesionales del sector. Nuestro lema, fisioterapia sin apellidos y con ciencia.
Muy buenas compañeros y compañeras. Mi nombre es Rubén Fernández y para mí es un auténtico placer estar en un episodio más de la radio ApplePodcast. El episodio de hoy, como podéis intuir leyendo el título, pues es un tanto especial y diferente. Es el primer día que entrevistamos a un invitado de habla no hispana y qué mejor manera de inaugurar esta senda pues con Jeremy Lewis, uno de los principales, por no decir el principal, referente en el campo del hombro en todo el mundo. Es sin duda una auténtica suerte tenerle por aquí y quería agradecer personalmente a César y a Carles de Fisiofocus que han ido moviendo todos los hilos y desde el primer momento pues han tenido predisposición para que este encuentro se materializara de alguna manera. La verdad que no ha sido fácil desde el punto de vista logístico y personalmente para un servidor, como podéis comprender tampoco. Pensar que el mismo día de la grabación prácticamente me tiritaban de los nervios los dedos, pero bueno, la verdad que creo que mereció la pena y el resultado lo tenéis en los 2 próximos podcasts que espero de corazón que disfrutéis. Si me estás escuchando desde iVoox, decirte que en YouTube tienes acceso al capítulo y en concreto a la entrevista en formato audiovisual de manera totalmente gratuita. Agradecería enormemente que te pasaras por ahí y además pues que nos dejaras un me gusta y una suscripción, apoyando así a todo este proyecto. La dinámica de estos 2 capítulos es la siguiente. Yo planteo la pregunta en español y la respuesta por parte de Jeremy es en inglés. Y como no tenemos dinero para traductores, pues tendréis que afinar vuestro oído inglés para exprimir las respuestas. Aunque a Jeremy es una persona que se le entiende muy fácilmente y con un mínimo que entendáis inglés, pues lo cogeréis sin problema. Los puntos que tratamos en esta primera parte son los siguientes. Al principio, como en la dinámica de los capítulos, pues comenzamos con una pequeña autopresentación tanto de Jeremy Lewis como de César Fernández. Después pasan los dos a contarnos un poco de dónde surgió la idea de escribir el manuscrito de The Shoulder, Theory and Practice. También nos cuentan qué diferencias existen en este manuscrito respecto a compendios pasados del hombro. Y después comentamos un par de capítulos, como puede ser el de la incertidumbre en el abordaje de la evaluación del hombro. Jeremy nos cuenta, pues a día de hoy, qué sabemos con más o menos certeza y qué no sabemos también con más o menos certeza. Y terminamos esta primera parte hablando de la posible relación que exista entre la patología de hombro y el COVID persistente. A continuación, un mensaje rápido para nuestro patrocinador, Fisiofocus, formación especializada en fisioterapia. Para más información puedes buscarlos en redes sociales o en su página web, donde encontrarás formación tanto en el formato online como en el formato presencial. Además, en esta ocasión, igual que en episodios anteriores, Fisiofocus nos ha dado pie a realizar un sorteo con todos vosotros. Consiste en un sorteo para una plaza en el curso titulado Abordajes avanzados de fisioterapia en el dolor de hombro, técnicas invasivas con control ecoguiado, con César Fernández de las Peñas, que aparece en el episodio de hoy y en el próximo, y con José Luis Arias. Simplemente meteros en nuestro perfil de Instagram y echar un poco lo que hay que hacer para participar. Recordar @fisiopodcast. Sin más, os dejo con la entrevista. Como os decía, pues espero que lo disfrutéis tanto como nosotros hicimos grabándolo y especialmente que saquéis algo en claro de cara a mejorar vuestra práctica clínica, lo cual no tengo ninguna duda. Haceros un buen café y espero que lo disfrutéis. Esto es ApplePodcast. Muy buenas, bienvenidos al podcast, Jeremy and César. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Hola.
Muchas gracias, Rubén.
Bueno, la primera pregunta siempre es pediros una pequeña autopresentación. Entonces, si quieres, Jeremy, puedes empezar.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name's Jeremy Lewis. I was born in New Zealand. I trained in Australia. After I finished my training, I did the 1-year manipulative therapy course with Jeff Maitland. He was teaching in those days. And then I did sports physiotherapy also in Australia. And 22 years ago, I came to live in England. I planned to come just for a year, but I've stayed here ever since. And I work as a professor of musculoskeletal research and also as a consultant physiotherapist in the NHS. I was really enjoying living in Europe until some political reasons changed living in Europe. So I'm desperate for a European passport. So if anybody is looking to adopt a cousin, uncle, brother, grandfather, I'd be very happy to become Spanish.
Thank you. César.
Sí, nada, buenos días. Yo hablaré en español en cualquier momento para los oyentes. Bueno, soy César de las Peñas, fisioterapeuta. Trabajo en la Universidad de Juan Carlos, en Madrid. Y bueno, realmente soy fisioterapeuta, que sobre todo trabajo con terapia manual y fisioterapia invasiva. Y realmente el motivo de estar aquí es por la colaboración y la amistad con Jeremy en el libro que presentaremos luego en el podcast cuando nos digas. Y realmente, pues bueno, poco más puedo decir. Es decir, que trabajo en la Universidad de Juan Carlos, nos encanta la profesión y poco más, porque creo que aquí el protagonista es Jeremy.
Bueno, por la primera pregunta, por ir metiéndonos en materia, ¿de dónde surgió la idea de escribir este libro?
Jeremy, how was the origin of the idea for the textbook?
Well, it was your idea, was the original idea. I think I've always wanted to write a book on the shoulder. I probably wouldn't have done it if I hadn't received the communication from you. And I probably wouldn't have done it if there hadn't been COVID. So a lot of things came together and something I've wanted to do for a long time. I also wanted to work with you, but also wanted to work with all the contributors that have contributed to the book. I wanted to choose people who I've learned from in my career from all different sorts of places. And I wanted the book also to be really patient-focused. And as you know, the very first chapter of the book is written by patients about their experiences with shoulder pain. And so that was an important theme for both of us through the book to make sure that it was directed towards the most important person in healthcare, which isn't the doctor, isn't the physiotherapist, but the patient.
Bien,
sí,
realmente la historia es muy divertida, ¿no? Yo me quería retirar de participar en libros y había una editorial que es Has Been Publishing, que es la editorial que ha publicado el libro, que saldrá en un par de semanas, si va todo bien. Y querían hacer un libro de hombro y me lo propusieron a mí. Yo le dije, realmente de hombro yo no tal. ¿Y qué hice? Pensé en el The Shoulder Man y dije, hablé con Jeremy y se lo propuse. I want to say this in English because I need to press him because I think that at the beginning he was not happy. I think that he doesn't want to get the textbook at that time, but I pressed him and finally he accepted. It was an honor that the shoulder man in the world was decided to write the textbook. Y como decía, le apreté. Y al final, pues, creamos el libro de Shoulder, de Theory and Practice, que es entre comillas, el título del curso, ¿no? Es decir, que Jeremy ha llevado a lo largo del mundo durante muchos años. Realmente fue así.
That's why I've got to say muchas gracias to you, because if you hadn't been in contact, I probably would never have done it. But now I'm so happy and delighted with what we've achieved together with the patients who contributed and all the other authors. I hope people find it a useful resource.
Thank you. Bueno, pues metiéndonos un poco, ¿qué creéis que diferencia este manuscrito que ahora mismo, como decía, iba a salir a la luz y a lo mejor cuando este podcast está ya circulando está ya a la venta? ¿qué creéis que lo diferencia con los compendios pasados? ¿Y qué creéis que aporta a nivel profesional, tanto para la fisioterapia como para el resto de profesiones sanitarias?
I think that this question is easy. Why do you think that this is the best textbook on shoulder?
Oh, I don't know if it's the best textbook.
It will be, sure.
I can't say it's the best textbook. I hope people find it useful resource, and I hope people find it something that supports their clinical practice, both from a theoretical and a practical point of view. I think.
And what do you think? What things do you say this is unique in this textbook? What are you really proud of the difference of this textbook with previous one?
Yeah, so I'm really proud of. First of all, it's very patient focused. I'm really excited about the breadth of the different subjects it discusses. I don't know of any textbook that talks about the range of rehabilitation that we've presented in the book, and all the different assessment procedures, but also looking at communication, listening to the patient's voice, talking about clinical reasoning, shared decision making, behavioural change. We've tried to make this as holistic as possible by asking the very best authors around the world to contribute their time and their expertise. Again, with the remit that it's always the patient's voice, the patient who's the most important person in healthcare has tried always to be the focus of this book, and also tried really hard to identify where there are uncertainties in our knowledge, and so not trying to, say we know everything as well.
Perfecto.
Bien. Yo he visto desde fuera, ¿no? Realmente decir que la gran cantidad de colaboradores que fuimos recolectando es impresionante. Es decir, realmente cada capítulo está escrito por 4 o 5 personas, como ha dicho Jeremy, de los mejores del mundo en diferentes aspectos. Y comparado con otros libros, pues probablemente yo creo que los detalles, como he dicho, que está centrado en el paciente, de Patient Focus, es muy importante porque hay capítulos propios de cada disciplina. Muchas veces un fisioterapeuta puede pensar, ¿qué diferencia hay el tratamiento entre un hombro de una persona que hace un deporte, es decir, voleibol o natación? Por ejemplo, hay un capítulo del el hombro del nadador. Los pequeños detalles que a lo mejor puedan parecer un ejercicio para uno u otro se detallan específicamente en cada en cada capítulo de cada afección concreta. Por tanto, va patient a patient, condition by condition en cada uno de los capítulos, y obviamente por expertos en la materia. Creo que no sé si llegará a 100, 120. How many contributors we have? 100 or more? I don't know.
I think more than 100 if we take all the patients. But I think there's at least we had more than 50 patients contributing, but because of the size, the book was already twice the size it was supposed to be. It sort of just grew every week. We've probably limited it to about 10 or 15 patients. But what I'm hoping is that we'll find a way to release the voices, the comments of the other patients, maybe through websites or something like that, if we have permission to do that. I'm finding this a little bit. Do you know that film Ace Ventura with Jim Carrey? You know the film Ace Ventura. You know when he says, he goes into the African village with his translator, and he says, "Say exactly what I'm saying to the African villagers," and he says, "I've come with love and happiness from my people to your people," and the translator says, "The white devils come to murder your children." So I'm hoping that when we're translating this, it's all coming out okay.
Algo que ha dicho, por ejemplo, el libro empezó con una previsión de 450 páginas y tiene 780. So almost the double of the space that we wanted at the beginning. Y algo también muy particular es que los primeros capítulos está escrito, pues son como case report, como la visión personal de cada paciente, y pacientes, lo típico, ¿no? Muy difíciles, que han experimentado un largo recorrido y que realmente plasman el razonamiento que hay en el libro. O sea, que empieza desde el paciente hasta el final del libro.
¿Estás disfrutando del podcast? Puedes dejarnos tu me gusta o, mejor aún, puedes invitarnos a un café y así apoyar al proyecto. Tan solo pincha en el enlace que tienes en la descripción y así tendremos energía suficiente para defender a capa y espada una fisioterapia sin apellidos y con ciencia. No te entretengo más, volvemos con el episodio.
Qué bueno. Bueno, ya habéis tocado un poco los temas, los puntos clave del libro, podríamos decir, aquello que le diferencia respecto a compendios pasados. Si os parece, un capítulo interesante es el capítulo 10, que es el de incertidumbre en clínica. Entonces yo quería preguntarle a Jeremy, pues qué sabemos a día de hoy, más o menos con cierta certeza, en el abordaje y en la evaluación del hombro, y qué no tenemos tan claro.
Okay, and thank you for that question. I hope that's another unique point about the book. What I'm hoping is that this book will be the first of many editions, well into the future. And what we tried to achieve in chapter 10 was asking the authors who are experts in their particular field 3 questions once they had finished their chapter. And the questions were, as you said, what do we know? What do we really know? What do we think we know, but actually we might not know? And what don't we know? And it's obviously asking 100 people that question, we're going to be getting a lot of valuable information that, took time to synthesize the different themes and put it into a way that was readable and understandable. And what I'm hoping will happen is that current researchers and future researchers will look at the answers to those questions, especially what do we think we know, but we don't really know, and what don't we know, and maybe start to research to find the answers to those questions. And what I'm hoping in future editions of this book, that the areas that we don't understand will become filled in. And of course, people will always be asking new questions. But I'm hoping that chapter 10 will, first of all, make us a little bit more humble, because we don't really know the answers to every question, but also provide an opportunity for people to start answering those questions. So, it'd be nice in future editions of this book that we'll also be able to acknowledge that question was asked, and here's an answer to that question.
What will be, Jeremy, also the conclusion? For example, if we need to ask, what do you think, what we don't know and what we need to focus on better diagnosis on shoulder, based on this chapter, on all the things that we are discussing?
Okay, so I think throughout the book, one of the themes that has emerged is, we are obviously within the first generations of humans who can see inside the body in people who are alive. So we have the introduction of X-rays for the shoulder 115 years ago. In the 1970s, we have the introduction of CT and MRI. And then from the end of the 1980s, 1990s, we have the introduction of ultrasound into clinical practice. And from a diagnostic point of view, from an imaging point of view, there was an assumption that whatever we can see that looks a bit different may be the cause of the patient's symptoms. And on the basis of that, we've been promising patients fixes, cures, by repairing their rotator cuff or removing their acromion or reattaching their glenoid fossa. But what we've seen very clearly, and this is discussed in great detail in the book, is that even though we can see inside the body, very often what we're seeing are just probably age-related changes. They're just normal changes that occur as we get older. What that means for the 90% of people most clinicians see who haven't had serious trauma what it means is that they're having elective surgery on tissues that are not causing their symptoms. And we're all emerging from this horrible pandemic over the last few years. And all of our health systems are struggling. And what we need to do is we need to reframe musculoskeletal care so that we're not reducing the quality of care, but we are trying to reduce the cost of care. And one of the themes that emerges through the book is that non-surgical management, specifically provided by physiotherapists around the world, is not in any way reducing the quality of care, but definitely reducing the cost of care. Because a lot of the diagnostic procedures are identifying problems that aren't really problems. And the other part of the diagnostic dilemma is that when you're developing a clinical test, such as a special orthopedic test, to identify the structure that's a problem, if the reference tests, such as the X-ray, the MRI, the ultrasound, isn't capable of differentiating people with and without symptoms, then the clinical diagnostic test is also not as valid as we would like it to be. And so another theme in the book is that maybe until somebody invents an MRI machine that rings a bell or flashes a light and says this structural change is the cause of symptoms, maybe what we should be doing, and this is a big theme of chapter 15 in the book about diagnosis and a new classification system for the shoulder, led by Angela Cadigan from New Zealand, that maybe what we should be doing is not being so focused on the structure that's causing the problem, but what's the patient's functional limitation, and what can we do as a healthcare team to improve the patient's function, reduce their disability. And we discuss that in detail and provide some solutions and some answers to that in the book.
Yeah, I think another good chapter is when the shoulder is not the shoulder. There's another chapter saying that not all shoulder pain is shoulder pain. Ruben, permíteme. You have opened, there will be one question that we have never discussed is in future editions, do you think that we need to include a new chapter of shoulder pain and COVID-19? Have you seen if there is any change in patients or pain patterns or something that the COVID-19, the long COVID, can induce shoulder pain?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question and a great idea. Thank you for that. I tried to, when I was, you've obviously contributed enormously and written your chapters and worked together with co-authors, as I did. And I tried to make the book as contemporaneous as possible and refer to COVID, because it was written during the time of lockdowns and the pandemic in both of our countries around the whole world. And certainly from the pandemic in England, working in the United Kingdom, working in the National Health Service, there was a long period of time we weren't allowed to see patients face to face, and we were only allowed to do telephone conversations or video conversations. And one of the hardest things for me was when you've got a patient, someone desperately seeking care on the other end of a video or telephone with a frozen shoulder, who is in screaming pain or calcific tendinopathy, who's in absolute agony. And there was really nothing that we could do. And it was so difficult to support people during that time. So that was a thing that emerged in the book. For some reason, and I don't know if it's anecdotal or not, there seemed to be such a large increase in the number of people reporting frozen shoulders during the pandemic. And I don't know, because we know today, and we talk about that in the book, that frozen shoulders is partly a lifestyle problem as well. It can be influenced by adding some adiposity, visceral fat. So we know there's a relationship between lifestyle and the development of frozen shoulders, and there's a relationship between stress and musculoskeletal symptoms. And so just maybe if people were worried about, not seeing their loved ones, worried about their job, worried about their children's education. Maybe that was a reason why, anecdotally, there seemed to be a great increase in frozen shoulders. There seemed to be a lot of people reporting severe shoulder pain a long time after having the vaccinations. And so there's a lot of questions that the pandemic, that maybe have been brought about by the pandemic, that will need to be answered and addressed in the future. So your suggestion is excellent. And maybe there will need to be a chapter that relates to the impact of COVID on shoulder symptoms and maybe other musculoskeletal problems as well.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Hasta aquí el podcast de hoy. Si te ha gustado el contenido y además crees que ha sido de utilidad, recuerda que puedes compartirlo con tus amigos. Pequeños gestos que hacen que este podcast siga creciendo y llegando a más gente. Si quieres estar al tanto de futuros episodios, puedes seguirnos en redes sociales o suscribirte a la newsletter de nuestra página web, donde también podrás encontrar las notas de todos los episodios. Muchas gracias por tu tiempo. Hasta la próxima.